What is up, fight nerds and dirty gamblers? I am Erik, and this is Erik Bets Fights. Welcome back to my channel, gang. This is going to be my full card breakdown for UFC Orlando, headlined by what should be a pretty fun fight between Stephen Thompson and Kevin Holland. Could be a little bit of a passing of the torch kind of situation. Maybe not. I guess we'll find out. I'll definitely be sharing my thoughts on that fight, at the end of the video here as we go through the breakdown. We'll be starting at the bottom of the card, working our way up to the top. I am going to skip. Usually I start out the video by doing a recap of last time. I need to be done in like an hour here because my wife and I are going to play trivia tonight. So I'm going to skip that. I did lose a little bit on the last UFC card. However, I had a clean sweep on the PFL card. So that was kind of cool. I kept it really small on the PFL card. I just played a couple props. They both hit. So that was kind of exciting. Do me a favor before we move forward here, though, folks. One thing that I always forget to do is to try to implore you to leave a comment on the video. People do a pretty good job of that anyway. I have a few of my standard folks that always drop by the video and leave a comment, and I really do appreciate that. But for anyone else watching, here's what I want you to do. Down in the comments, stop right now and let me know, what is your favorite bet on UFC Orlando? Whatever it might be. If you were only allowed to make one bet on this card, could be a money line, could be a prop, could be a parlay, whatever it is. If you could only make one bet on this card, what would it be? I want to know your number one favorite bet. Drop it in the comments down there if you would, please. Obviously, those comments always help with, getting the algorithm going, getting more eyes on what I'm doing here. While you're at it, go ahead and drop a like if you would, please, on the video. And if you haven't subscribed, I love it if you'd subscribe as well. Whether you're seeing this on the Erik Bets Fights channel or the Never Hedge Media channel, go ahead and subscribe to both. I'd appreciate it very much. All right, gang, that's about all I've got to say about that. Oh, one other little housekeeping thing I want to add before we actually jump into the breakdown here. I did recently strike up a little partnership with BetUS. They've been creating partnerships with a lot of content creators and Twitter personalities and that sort of thing. So how this works, I dropped the link in the description of the video here. They've got a special going on where if you deposit $100, they'll match that with $125. So they're literally matching it at 125%, and it says up to $2,500. So apparently they will match a deposit up to $2,500, and they'll match it at 125%, if I'm understanding this correctly. If you do it through the link in this video here, I'm not even sure how it works exactly. I've got some sort of partnership revenue share type thing with them. So if you make a deposit using the link down here, this link is specifically for me. I think that I make a little money off that. So I don't charge anything for the work I do. I don't have a Patreon. I don't have anything like that. I do put a lot of time into this. And, besides the money that I hopefully make on my bets, I don't actually make any money. So, and I hate I hate begging and asking for money, but hey, if you use BetUS or if you're looking for a new book to use, go ahead and hit up that link there, make a deposit there. And that will actually help me out financially a little bit. So that's kind of cool. I'm not even sure exactly how it works. I don't even know how much I get, but tell you what, if you go there and make a deposit on my next video, I'll let you know what happened. I'll let you know how much money I got because I really don't know how it's going to work. But anyway, enough about that. I don't like talking about money. Let's go ahead and jump into breaking down this fight card. We're going to start with, I think I've got these in the right order. First fight of the night, if I'm not mistaken, should be, I do not know how to say her name, Yasmin Yaragui versus Estela Nunes. Excuse me, this fight will be taking place at strawweight. As you can see here, Yasmin Yaragui is a pretty big favorite, showing her at minus 350 here with Estela Nunes at plus 280. I think that's pretty close to where they're still at here. Estela Nunes does have a little bit of a size advantage. She's an inch taller and has 2 inches of reach, but I don't think that's necessarily going to be anything too crazy here. Breaking down their styles, they're both primarily strikers. Yasmin Yaragui is a pretty stereotypical Muay Thai type striker, especially even if you look at her stance. She tucks her chin, she holds her shoulders up high. Not a ton of movement. She kind of plants her feet and sort of stalks forward, almost like that shoot a box type style. She is pretty aggressive with strikes. She covers distance well. She's got a nice snappy 1-2. She's got the kind of strikes that just look nice. She's got pretty striking. Her technique looks good. She's nice and snappy and powerful. She has a nice ability in the cage to stay poised and consistent. She doesn't really get emotional. She doesn't really make mistakes. She keeps it pretty even keel, I guess. She looks really kind of just relaxed in there. Like I said, Estela Nunes does have a little bit of a size advantage here, not a whole lot. I seem to be in the minority here, but I do like her striking quite a bit. I like I like watching her fight. I like the way she strikes. She doesn't have as much power as Yasmin, I don't think, and she can be a little bit tentative and low volume at times, but she is more accurate with her strikes than Yasmin is. Um, One thing that concerns me here is Estela Nunes does tend to slow down later in a fight. I think we could see her. She uses movement quite a bit more. She's lighter on her feet. She moves around a lot more than Yasmin does. We could see Nunes, looking good to the judges. Putting out more volume, potentially landing more early in the fight. But then we could also see Nunes start to slow down later in the fight, which is a little bit concerning. Um, I I'll just cut to the chase here. I did put a bet on Estela Nunes. When I finished the tape here, she was at like plus 270 or something like that. And then I pulled it up a little bit later and she was at plus 300 and I grabbed that. And then I pulled it up again a little bit after that and she was back to like plus 270 or something. So I must have caught like the few seconds on William Hill where she was at plus 300. I do like Yasmin to win this fight. I understand why she's favored, but I really don't understand why she's minus 350. I honestly don't. And maybe she's going to come out and show why she's minus 350 and I'm going to look stupid, but to me, that line is ridiculous and this fight is much closer than that. Um, like I said, I did put one unit on Stella Nunez at plus 300. I'm considering potentially sprinkling a little bit on Yasmin to finish in round three. Because, like I said, I do think Nunez will slow down later in the fight. So basically, like if my bet is going to hit on Estela Nunez, the way I see that playing out is Nunez, sticking and moving, using her movement, using her volume to, potentially win the first two rounds before slowing down later in the fight. So it's just a matter of, can she bank those two rounds before she slows down? But if she slows down too much and Yasmin is able to connect with that big power that she does have, could she put Estella out later in the fight? So I may hedge a little bit by sprinkling a little bit on Yasmin to finish in round three, but not sure on that yet. But should be a decently fun fight to kick off the card, and I do have a bet on it right away. All right, next up we've got Francis the Fire Marshall versus Marcelo Rojo. I just gotta say, like the Fire Marshall, it is a creative nickname. It is a great nickname, but Elliot Marshall did that over a decade ago, right? Elliot the Fire Marshall is the original Fire. But anyway, this fight's taking place it's at featherweight, right? I think so. Um, anyway, the first thing that stands out to me here is their records. Marcelo Rojo is 16-8, Francis Marshall 6-0. Marshall has a slight favorite at minus 170, come back on Rojo plus 145. And another thing that stands out right away, of course, is that Francis Marshall is only 23 years old. Marcelo Rojo is 34 years old. Size wise, they're about the same size. So this is one of those situations where, Francis Marshall, he's only got 6 fights. He's only 23 years old. He looks very, very promising. When you watch the tape on him, looks like he's got the goods, right? He's young, he's inexperienced, he's still got a lot of growing and learning to do, but he looks like he's got the tools to hang around at the UFC level. I do think he's a UFC level fighter. Um, and Marcelo Rojo, obviously, he's a vet. He's been around a long time. He's got 16-8, not the greatest record. To me, this looks like one of those situations. I don't necessarily buy too much into I don't think fights are fixed or anything like that. But I do think, and not like it always works, sometimes it backfires, but I do think sometimes you can look at a matchup and kind of tell what the UFC is trying to do. And I think, Francis Marshall, he's young, he's talented, he's aggressive, he's a good looking kid. I think they're trying to give him a winnable fight here. Uh, it's a stern test against a veteran who's been around. I mean, Marcelo Rojo's been a pro for over 10 years, but doesn't have the greatest record. It's a stern but fitting test for someone who's in the position that Francis Marshall is in. So that's kind of how I see this fight. Like, I think the UFC wants Francis Marshall to win here. Um, like I said, he is young and he is inexperienced, which is one thing that you can kind of tell by the way that he fights. He comes out very aggressively. Everything that he does as hard as he can, right? He throws his strikes as hard as he can. He shoots takedowns aggressively. He's trying to get you out of there, and that's a style that it's pretty common for younger fighters, inexperienced fighters, and especially because so far in his career it's been working for him. It's the kind of style that usually when a younger fighter comes into the UFC this early, it's a style that's going to have to change some because they're probably not going to be able to keep their cardio going if they do. He's clearly not thinking too much about conserving energy, right? So it's likely that that style will change a little bit as he grows and matures. But for now, he comes in pretty hard and really puts a high pace on his opponents, and it works pretty well for him. Um, he does like to wrestle, but he seems pretty well rounded. He's not a great striker, but I do think he, especially for how young he is, he does transition pretty well between phases already. He sometimes you can tell when you're watching a fighter that they're like, okay, right now I am striking. Okay, now I am wrestling. Like I don't think he's like that. He does a pretty good job of like just seamlessly transitioning between the two, which I like to see. Marcelo Rojo, reasonably well-rounded guy. He's got quite a few wins by KO and quite a few wins by submission. But watching the tape on him, there just isn't really anything about him that impresses me, which is kind of why I think they're trying to get Francis Marshall a win here. He's solid, but just nothing that really stands out that makes me think like, okay, this guy's an excellent fighter. Um, that's about all I've got to say about it. I do think Francis Marshall will come out here. He'll put a pace on Marcelo Rojo. He should be able to take him down and control him on the ground somewhat. There's always the possibility that, especially when we're seeing a young up and comer having his first, like, because Francis Marshall fought a pretty low level of competition coming up too. This is a very big step up in competition for him here, as far as at least the experience and the veteran savvy that Marcelo Rojo brings to the table. So we could always see a situation where Francis Marshall comes out, he lets the fire go, he's putting that pace on, and maybe he tires himself out in his UFC debut here, stepping up, and Rojo takes over. That certainly could happen, and for that reason, I'm not going to be betting this fight, but I do think that Francis Marshall should win here. Oh, and I got to make sure I put my picks out because the homie Brian is always watching the videos, keeping track of the picks. I am going to pick Yasmin Yargui for the last fight. I did bet Nunez, but I will pick Yasmin. I will pick Francis Marshall to win here, probably by decision or maybe a late finish, but no bet for me here. Next up, we've got Natan Levy versus Genaro Valdez. Every card, there's always one, if not maybe a couple fights where I just don't feel like I have a super strong read. That This fight is one of those for me, and it could partially just be because I don't have a lot of interest in either of these fighters. They just don't pique my interest that much, to be frank. But this fight will be at lightweight. We see Natan Levy there at 7-1, Genaro Valdez at 10-1. Levy is favored at minus 180 with the comeback on Valdez plus 155. I think that's pretty accurate to where the odds are actually at. And height and reach is pretty much the same here. So, uh, like I said, I had a tough time getting a read on this fight. Genaro Valdez is a difficult fighter to get a confident read on. He's really aggressive. He's willing to embrace wild exchanges in the clinch. He fought mostly lower level competition on his way up, and even in his contender series fight and in his UFC debut against Matt Frivola, he fought in a really wild and aggressive way. Kind of like I was talking about with Francis Marshall, but um, the difference being Genaro Valdez is, he's 30 years old, he's 10-1, he's got a little more age, he's got a little more experience, but he kind of still fights, comes out and puts on that wild pace. He's dangerous in the first round, capable of finding a KO or a submission, but how does he hold up? Later in the fight, if he's not able to make that happen, if he's putting that pace on, looking for that finish, but it doesn't happen, how does he hold up? And so, that style, again, kind of like what I said with Francis Marshall, like we see inexperienced fighters, younger fighters come in and utilize a style like that a lot, but it's a style that doesn't tend to hold up at the UFC level for very long. And Genaro Valdez, he can certainly prove me wrong. And like I said, I had a hard time getting a read on him, so maybe my read is totally wrong. But he doesn't seem to me like a guy who's going to stick around in the UFC for very long. I just don't know that he's got a style and a skill level that's really going to allow him to stick around here for very long. Natan Levy, kind of a karate. If you look at his Tapology picture there, it's pretty clear. He's kind of a karate style striker. He does have some grappling as well. He's another guy that I don't feel like I have a strong read on him. I'm just not sure what I think about him. So this is one of those fights where you know maybe neither of these guys is going to be around long anyway. I guess we'll see. But this is one of those fights. It's kind of a sit back and take notes spot for me. I did bet this fight. but I didn't pick a side. I did bet the under 2.5 here because I think it's very likely that either Genaro Valdez, well, either of these guys could get an early finish, but Genaro Valdez is going to come out, go hard, looking for that early finish. He may end up gassing himself out and allowing Levy to take over, or Levy could gas himself out too. But either way, I think that this is a fight that, with just the way that these guys fight, I think there's an excellent chance that somebody's going to end up getting the finish here. So I don't necessarily have any interest in picking a side. I did bet the under 2.5. Um, as far as a pick though, I guess I'll go with Natan Levy, but no real confidence there at all. Next up, we've got Tracy Cortez versus Amanda Hebosh. Should be a fun fight taking place in the flyweight division. We see Tracy Cortez at 10-1, Amanda Hebosh 11-3. Cortez showing at plus 110, Hebosh at minus 130. I think that's pretty accurate. They're both, it's pretty close to a coin flip fight. You might even be able to catch Hebosh at plus money if you look around, but they're both pretty close to that coin flip spot. Age wise, about the same. Tracy Cortez has got 2 inches of height, and Amanda Hebosh has half an inch of reach here. These are both very promising up and coming flyweights, and I think this should be a fun fight, and it should be a pretty good test for both of them. Um, stylistically, you know, Cortez is a wrestler. Hebosh is a jujitsu fighter. If we're gonna break it down, like oversimplify it like that, but on the feet, Hebosh tends to be more aggressive and consistent. Cortez can kind of struggle to get her stand up game going, especially if an opponent looks to keep her on the back foot. She can have a really hard time kind of getting comfortable in the stand up. Um, on paper, Amanda Hebosh has black belts in both BJJ and judo, so a very strong grappling background. She was raised in a martial arts family. Her dad was, I believe, an instructor of judo, BJJ, and Muay Thai. So she grew up training in martial arts from the time that she was very young. Because of the BJJ and Muay Thai, I expect Hebosh to potentially have the upper hand in clinching situations, but Cortez does a nice job of shooting takedowns in open space, sort of that freestyle style of wrestling rather than Greco-Roman. She does a nice job of shooting, shooting double legs, shooting single legs, and running the pipe or finding the angle to trip and that sort of thing. She does that pretty well. So, long story short, my take on this fight, most of the time, I'm going to side with the wrestler over the jujitsu fighter, especially when the wrestler has shown solid submission defense, which Tracy Cortez showed against Melissa Gatto. She was able to get the takedowns in that fight. She spent a lot of time on top. Melissa Gatto was very busy with her guard, looking for submissions, and Cortez was able to keep herself out of danger for the most part. And I see this fight playing out similarly to that. I think Cortez will be able to Amanda Hebosh she's got excellent takedown defense. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but her takedown defense numbers are really good. But I want to point out that she also hasn't fought a wrestler the caliber of Tracy Cortez. That's why the stats never completely tell the story, right? We always have to look at the details behind them. Yes, Amanda Hebosh has an excellent takedown rating, but I don't think she's faced a takedown artist with the skills of Tracy Cortez. So I do think we could see Tracy Cortez get the takedowns here. I think we could see Tracy Cortez riding out control time, landing ground and pound. And I do think that she will win a decision here. And I did bet Tracy Cortez. I believe I got her at plus 110. As always, when we get to the end of the video here, we will take a look at my bets. As I was breaking down this fight, talking about like the wrestler versus the jiu-jitsu fighter, it reminded me of was this around like UFC 60 maybe? I could be totally wrong on that, but when Matt Hughes fought Hoist Gracie, remember that? Because Matt Hughes said in an interview afterwards, Matt Hughes beat Hoist Gracie pretty easily, honestly. And he said in an interview afterwards, he was like, "Yeah, I mean, there was a part of me that was afraid because of the mystique that Hoist Gracie has. Like he's like, I was able to take him down. I was on top, and there was a part of me that kept thinking that all of a sudden he was gonna just magically pull out some crazy jujitsu move and submit me, but it never happened. Like that's what I thought of looking at this. Is like even though jujitsu does have that mystique about it, and that there is a lot of danger in a good jujitsu player, off of their back. Most of the time, I'm still gonna, especially if the wrestler has a decent amount of submission training, so that they have the defense. I'm still gonna side with the wrestler most of the time as the person who is able to dictate where the fight takes place. Oh, as always, I'm taking too long in these fights. Let's move on to the next one. We've got Darren Elkins versus Jonathan Pierce taking place at featherweight. Darren Elkins at 27-10, Jonathan Pierce at 13-4. Obviously, we see Jonathan Pierce is a huge favorite here. He's showing at minus 420. I think he might even be up at like minus 450, minus 500 in spots, with Darren Elkins at plus 310. One difference that stands out right away here is Darren Elkins is 38 years old, 8 years older than Jonathan Pierce at 30 years old. Pierce has 2 inches of height, and the reach is about the same. I'm going to keep it simple how I break down this fight. Yes, Jonathan Pierce should probably destroy Darren Elkins here. I think Jonathan Pierce is a very promising fighter. He's pretty big for the division. He's pretty powerful. He's got skills everywhere. He should be able to have the upper hand on the feet. He should be able to take Elkins down and do damage on him, pun intended. But I do not think this line should be as wide as it is. And there's a possibility that Jonathan Pierce is going to come out here and take Elkins down and just, blast punches and elbows into his face and get him out of there in round one and look like a minus 450, minus 500 favorite. I'm not saying that might not happen. It absolutely might. But to me, that line feels wide. It's not quite enough that I'm going to bet on Darren Elkins, but I know the story is that Elkins is washed, and I don't necessarily disagree, but you know, to me, washed, a fighter being washed isn't like, it's not binary code. It's not zeros and ones. It's not you are washed or you aren't. It's a continuum, right? It's a spectrum. Where are you on the washed scale? And I think that where I placed Elkins on the washed scale is not as low as a lot of other people do. His last fight was Tristan Connolly, his most recent fight. I think so. He looked pretty decent in that fight. And Tristan Connolly is not a world beater, of course, but I think Elkins looked pretty decent in that fight. I think he is still capable of putting on pretty decent performances. Jonathan Pierce is a pretty high level of competition for Elkins to be taking on right now. But I will say this, we've seen Jonathan Pierce slow down a little bit, and we know that. How does Darren Elkins fight? Darren Elkins comes out and gets beat on for 5 minutes or 10 minutes or whatever it might be. And then uh, he basically lets his opponent tire themselves out by beating on him. And then he's basically like, I'm tougher than you and I'm going to last longer than you. And you can beat on me for a while and then I'm going to come back and finish you. So could that happen here? It's probably not very likely. But if Jonathan Pierce is able to, take Elkins down, wear on him, but he's not able to get him out of there, do we see Elkins win that battle of attrition and come back late? Probably not, but it would be pretty cool. But anyway, gun to my head, if I have to bet this fight, I'm taking the big plus money on Darren Elkins. Absolutely not touching Jonathan Pierce because I think that line is way too wide. But I will pick Jonathan Pierce to win here, and I think he'll probably get it done inside the distance. If I had to bet this fight, I would probably bet the. I'm not even sure what the number's at, but I'd bet the under 2.5 or that doesn't go the distance because I do think there's a good chance that we see a finish in this fight. Moving on. Next up, we've got Michael Johnson versus Mark Diakase taking place in the lightweight division. Oh, trying to find my notes here. Where am I at? All right. Michael Johnson, 20-18. Mark Diakase, 16-5. We see Diakase as a decent size favorite at minus 230. Come back at Michael Johnson plus 190. One difference that stands out right away here, Michael Johnson's 36 years old, Mark Diakase's 29 years old, so a bit of a difference there. They are about the same size, 5'10", 73 inches of reach, so not much difference there. Michael Johnson is a difficult fighter to break down. I mean, we all know who Michael Johnson is at this point, but the thing is, we never know who he's going to be from fight to fight and night to night, right? Like, he is a guy who is, record of 20-18. He has lost to fighters who are not very good, and he has defeated fighters who are very good. At his best, Michael Johnson is an elite level talent. When he comes out and puts on the best performance he's capable of putting on, he's right up there with the best lightweights in the world. But he's also capable of just not having it sometimes, so you just never really know what you're going to get. Mark Diakase, on the other hand, he's looked really good lately. We've seen Mark Diakase of OV at the end. He was a guy who did always have some wrestling skill. He did have some takedowns in some fights earlier in his UFC career, but he clearly has turned a corner, either in his wrestling ability or just in his willingness to use his wrestling, or potentially both. Looking at the numbers, Diakase landed. Do I have these numbers in front of me? Okay, so in his last two fights, which was Slava Klaus and Damir Hadzovic, he landed 11 takedowns against Slava, and 8 against Demir Hadzovic, which is so 19 total takedowns landed, not attempted, landed in his last 2 fights. In his previous 10 UFC fights before that, he landed fewer than that. So he's landed more takedowns in his last 2 fights combined than he did in his previous 10 fights combined. So and it could have just been something specific to the matchup, obviously with Slava, like you don't want to be on the feet with that guy, and it's clear that he has a big disadvantage in the wrestling. So does that mean Diakiese's going to come out and look to wrestle here? We don't know, but I think it's fair to favor Diakiese regardless of where this fight goes. He's a very solid kickboxer, solid enough wrestler. Michael Johnson, obviously, excellent boxing when he's on. He's got fast hands. He hits hard. He's got decent wrestling as well. He doesn't always necessarily look to use it. Um, Michael Johnson does have 79% takedown defense, and it's important to remember that even when he fought Habib, he held Habib to only 2 completed takedowns on 6 attempts. So even if Diakise does look to wrestle here, it's not necessarily going to be a walk in the park. Michael Johnson's not going to be an easy guy to take down. Um, but yeah, I don't count Michael Johnson out here at all, but I do think the line is probably about right, and I do think, I do see a lot of advantages in Diakise's corner, and I do favor him to win this fight. I believe I used him as a parlay piece. We'll take a look at that at the end here, but I do like Mark Diakise to get the win here. Next up, we've got Clay Guida versus Scott Holtzman in the lightweight division. Kind of a weird fight, right? Like it might be fun, it might not be fun. I don't know. So the first thing I think of when I see Clay Guida is that he's old, right? He's 40 years old. He's 40 years and 11 months. He'll be 41 in less than a month. Actually, in like a week, looks like. Anyway, but bear in mind as well that Scott Holtzman is 39. He's no spring chicken as well. Clay Guida, 37 and 22. Scott Holtzman, 14 and 5. Obviously, Guida's been around forever. We all know who Clay Guida is. Holtzman stands at 5'9, 2 inches taller than Guida's 5'7. But interestingly, Guida does have 1 inch of reach. First thing that stands out to me with Scott Holtzman is not even anything related to his skill set necessarily, but just that he's a big, strong, bricked up dude for lightweight, right? Like he's one of those guys that, like, when you see him in the octagon, he looks more like a middleweight. He's a big guy for lightweight, and Clay Guida is not a particularly big and physical guy for lightweight. Um, I have a difficult time, figuring out how this fight will play out. Is it going to be mostly in the striking? Is it going to be mostly in the grappling? Is it going to be an equal mix of each? Hard to say. But Clay Guida, even at 40 years old, almost 41 years old, he still is an absolute energizer bunny, right? He's always, always, always moving, always throwing strikes. I mean, he's on his bike constantly, circling, moving in and out, throwing strikes. He'll mix in the takedowns. Scott Holtzman definitely is the more physical and more powerful of the two. When they're on the feet, will Guida be able to stay on his bike and potentially outland Holtzman by just using his movement? Maybe. Um, I feel like Clay Guida is a good wrestler, but I feel like if we do see clinching and tying up and grappling here, I gotta lean Holtzman in those situations, largely because of the physicality. And those things don't always play out the way you think they're going to. The physicality doesn't always end up making that much of a difference, but I'm leaning toward thinking that it will here to some degree. Um, Holtzman is a minus 190 favorite with the comeback on Clay Guida at plus 160. I guess I get that. Part of me thinks that if I was gonna bet this, I would go with the underdog in Clay Guida, but I also wonder if that's just me wanting to bet on the aging veteran one more time, But because it's it's hard for me to see in a way, it's hard for me to see how Clay Guida wins this fight. I mean, I guess by just moving and landing more volume. But yeah, this is one of those fights where I have a hard time seeing how it's going to play out. So I really don't feel particularly confident one way or the other. I did use the over 2.5 here in a parlay, I believe. As far as a pick, I'm gonna pick Scott Holtzman, but it's not a super confident pick. And if I was gonna bet a side, I'd probably have to take the dog money on Clay Guida. I don't know. But yeah, we'll go with Holtzman as my pick. No bet here, except I did bet the over 2.5, but no money line bet anyway. All right, next fight we've got Angela Hill versus Emily Ducote at strawweight. Kind of an interesting matchup, right? We see Angela Hill 14-12. She's almost like the women's version of Michael Johnson, right? Like has fought at the UFC level a lot, has won quite a few, has lost quite a few. Emily Ducote 12-6. We see Angela Hill a small favorite or small underdog at plus 105. Ducote small favorite at minus 125. One big difference we see here is in the age. Emily Ducote is almost 29 and Angela Hill is almost 38. So just about a decade between them. Angela Hill 1 inch taller, 5'3" versus 5'2", and Angela Hill with 1.5 inches of reach, 64.5 inches versus 63 inches for Emily Ducote. Um, these two are. This is an interesting matchup because Emily Ducote, this is only her sophomore appearance, and she's making her sophomore appearance against her sophomore UFC appearance against the most experienced UFC women's fighter. Not necessarily for like most fights overall, but if I'm not mistaken, Angela Hill has more UFC fights than any other woman in history. I think she has over 20 UFC fights. I don't have that number in front of me right now, but it's a pretty big step for Emily Ducote there, right? I mean, she fought Jessica Penne in her debut, who's Jessica Penne's also like something like 39 years old, another aging veteran. But this is to me this is yet again another step up, I think, from Jessica Penne. Both of these two tend to ply their trade as strikers, but they're both reasonably well rounded. Emily Ducote, on paper, she should have the upper hand in the striking. She's a BJJ black belt, and she was also a wrestler in her younger years. I think at the high school level, maybe college level. I'm not exactly sure, but I do know that she has a wrestling background, and she's a BJJ black belt. Um, the three things that stand out to me in this fight when I look at this matchup. Number one is the age gap, of course. Hill's almost 38, Ducote's almost 29, like I mentioned. That it's always hard to know exactly how much to take that into account, but you do have to take into account a little bit, I think. Number two, the speed and the movement. Angela Hill is older, but she's a lot more dynamic. She uses movement really well, whereas Emily Ducote tends to be kind of flat-footed. She kind of plants her feet and just sort of waits to throw. Again, almost like that, a little bit of that shoot a box style. She's kind of just has her shoulders hunched and kind of plants her feet and just waits. Whereas Angela Hill is going to be moving, coming in at different angles, that kind of thing. And then of course number three is the massive experience gap, which I already talked about. To me, because of all the things that I see in Angela Hill's corner here, it's I absolutely wouldn't bet Emily Ducote as a favorite here. And I'm not saying Emily Ducote won't win. She might very well win, but I would not bet her as a favorite over Angela Hill. I mean, look at what Angela Hill's last fight, Lupi Godinez. Hill was like plus 250 or something there, wasn't she? I think Lupi was like a minus 300 favorite, and Angela Hill won that fight. So we just saw Angela Hill win a fight against um, a highly touted younger up and comer, right? And I mean, Lupita Godinez is a lot more highly touted than Emily Ducote is, and I think for good reason. And now we have Angela Hill as a small underdog to somebody who, I'm not speaking ill of Emily Ducote, but I don't. She may prove to be a very serious, highly touted prospect, but in my mind, she's not right now. And so, in some ways, I see why this fight is lined so closely, but in some ways, it seems a bit odd to me too. Like really, besides the age and the wear and tear on Angela Hill's body. I think if these two were the same age, we wouldn't see the line looking like that. Really, the Angela Hill being, you know, older is about the only reason I can see that's counting. The only thing I can see really counting against her here for the most part. Anyway, I blabbed about that for way too long. I'm going to pick Angela Hill here. I'm going to pick Angela Hill to win a decision here. I have not bet her, and I'm probably not going to bet this fight. If I don't think the line's going to move much here, if at all. If Angela Hill ended up being a bigger dog, I'd probably bet her here. But I think I am going to pick Angela Hill to win here, probably by decision. All right, we're 33 minutes in. We're doing all right. Try to finish up in an hour. Nico Price versus Philip Rowe. Should be a fun fight. Taking place in the welterweight division. Nico Price at 15-5, Phil Rowe 9-3. We see Nico Price plus 100, Phil Rowe minus 120. I think that might have flipped a little bit. Let me see here. Nico minus 138, Phil Rowe plus 124. Yeah, I thought so. Nico is actually a small favorite. I did bet Phil Rowe here. I think I got him at plus 120. So um these guys are about the same age. Philip Rowe does have 3 inches of height. He's 6'3" with Price at 6 feet, and he does have 4.5 inches of reach. Um, Nico Price is one of those guys that like sometimes I get a certain fighter in my head and I think that they're not very good. And I don't even know why I think that exactly. I just get it in my head and it's hard to get it out. And Nico Price is one of those guys that before I do tape on him, I'm always like, man, this guy's not very good. And then I watch the tape and I'm like, okay, he might be a little bit better than I think he is, but he's still not very good. So I don't know. He's not Nico Price he has the death touch. He has power, but other than that, he's just not very athletic. He's pretty slow. He's not very agile. He's not very coordinated. And as he gets tired, I mean, his striking is pretty slow and uncoordinated anyway, but as he gets tired, his striking really slows down. He throws like he's throwing through molasses. He gets really slow. Um, Both of these guys do have some wrestling in their back pocket, but they don't really look to use it that often. I think this fight will play out mostly in the stand up. Nico Price, like I said, he does have that death touch. He could land on Philip Rowe and put him out, but I lean toward thinking Philip Rowe is the quicker, more athletic guy. Like I said, he's got 3 inches of height and 5 inches of reach here. If he's able to use his movement to kind of try to stay on the outside and pick away at Price, and Philip Rowe does have some power too. He doesn't have the power that Nico Price has, but yeah, I I feel like Nico Price is kind of, unless he were to get his wrestling going, which he doesn't usually typically look to do, but unless he is able to, win like a wrestling based decision here, I see Nico Price as almost being kind of KO or bust here. I don't mean to oversimplify too much, but I think it's more likely that Phil Rowe just is able to be the quicker, more dynamic guy with the better movement and use that reach to just outstrike Nico Price. That's how I see this fight playing out. So, like I said, I did bet Phil Rowe at I think plus 120. So yeah, I'll pick Phil Rowe here, and I did bet him. Next up, we've got Erik Anders versus Kyle Daukaus taking place at middleweight. Kind of a weird fight. I don't know what to think of this one quite. Erik Anders at 14-7, Kyle Daukaus at 11-3. Kyle Daukaus is a minus 200 favorite here with the comeback on Erik Anders at plus 160. Erik Anders is 35 years old. Kyle Daukaus 29 years old. Daukaus is a little bit taller. He's 6'3" to Erik Anders is 6'1", and Daukaus has 1 inch of reach. Very different body types here. Obviously that's one of the things that stands out to me. Like, I don't want to speak ill of Erik Anders, but to me, he's kind of one of those guys he's kind of all just physicality. I don't want to say all. I mean, obviously you have to have some skills to be at the UFC level. I'm not saying he has no skills whatsoever, but I don't think highly of Erik Anders' skill set all that much. I really think that he's got power, he's got strength, he's got physicality. And other than that, I just don't think highly of him altogether. I'm still a little bit like the jury's still out on Kyle Daukaus for me a little bit. There are flashes of good things that I see from him, but sometimes I'm not so sure as well. Like he's a big tall guy. He's got some length. He's got some reach. He's obviously he's fantastic with that Darce choke. He calls himself the Darce Knight now. I think he's got like 6 Darce chokes on his record. So he's got that nice front headlock series. If you put yourself in a position where he's able to get that front choke series going on you, it can definitely be problematic. He's not a great striker, but his boxing looks okay. His striking looks okay. He's kind of starting to put it all together. Um, One thing I want to point out, I want to give a shout out to the podcast MMA by the Numbers. If you've never listened to that, check it out. It's really interesting. But according to MMA by the Numbers, Erik Anders has statistically some of the worst striking output and worst striking efficiency in UFC history. And I know you can look at UFC stats or look at Uncle Weezy's stats and see the percentages on those things, but MMA by the Numbers goes deeper on a lot of that stuff. And I don't know what the stats were, what the numbers were exactly, but he kind of went through all of that. And yeah, Erik Anders has some of the worst striking stats in UFC history. So that's kind of interesting. Like I said, Anders has power, but his hands are kind of slow. He can be outmaneuvered and kind of countered by a quicker fighter. Um, yeah, I don't know what to make of this one. I do think that Kyle Daukaus is the better fighter, technically speaking, but he's at some, besides the fact that he's got some height and reach here, he's at some serious physical disadvantages. I don't think Kyle Daukaus is a particularly strong and physical and powerful kind of guy. So Yeah, I'm not really interested in betting this one. If I were gonna bet it, I'd probably be just looking to have some fun. I'd probably bet either Anders' KO prop or Daukaus's sub prop, like something like that. But I don't have a strong take on this fight. I'm gonna as for a pick, I'm gonna pick Kyle Daukaus to win by submission, but I'm staying away from this one. I don't have a strong enough read here to do anything with it. Next up, we've got Jack Hermanson versus Roman Dolidze. This should be a cool fight. It's kind of a weird matchup. Um, Jack Hermanson, the Joker, 23-7, Roman Dolidze 11-1. We see Hermanson minus 170, slight favorite, Roman Dolidze plus 145. I think Hermanson might be. Oh yeah, I guess that's about right. He's out there at like minus 200 in spots. He can be had for minus 175. Yeah, minus 180, minus 190 range looks like about where he's at. Roman Dolidze can be had, plus 150, plus 160, maybe even plus 170 kind of range. They're both 34 years old. Roman Dolidze 1 inch taller at 6'2". And interestingly, Hermanson actually has an inch and a half of reach, 77 and a half to 76 for Roman Dolidze. I'm going to break this fight down somewhat simply. This is a classic minute winner versus moment winner kind of fight, in my opinion. Jack Hermanson, I think, is the better technical fighter, just as far as consistency, knowing how to win minutes, knowing how to win fights. Roman Dolidze is one of those guys he's a little bit dependent on finding that moment. He's not much of a minute winner. He's a little bit dependent on either finding a submission or finding a knockout. The thing is, he's pretty good at both of those things. He is pretty good at both of those things. But here in Jack Hermanson, he's fighting um, an elite or borderline elite middleweight here. He's fighting a guy who has pretty consistently for a number of years now been right up there amongst the best middleweights in the world. He's lost to some, he's beat some, but he's right up there. And so Dolidze is kind of, he's definitely stepping up some here. Dolidze is certainly capable of finding a knockout or potentially even a submission on Jack Hermanson, but I just don't think it's very likely. I think, Hermanson is well rounded, has pretty high level skills everywhere. I think Hermanson's going to be able to, he's. We mostly think of him as a dangerous grappler, but I think his striking has looked pretty good. I mean, obviously he was able to win a mostly striking based affair versus Chris Curtis recently. Um, yeah, I think to me the line makes sense here. I like Jack Hermanson to probably win a decision here. Maybe Dolidze being a guy who does rely on his physicality quite a bit. Maybe we would see Dolidze slow down and Hermanson be able to finish him later in the fight. But I lean toward thinking Hermanson probably finds a decision here. I think he'll be able to keep it safe on the feet. It's going to be dangerous. Dolidze could potentially catch him, like I said. If Hermanson does decide to use his wrestling, I don't think Dolidze he's dangerous off his back. He's a good submission grappler. I don't think he's a very good positional grappler, though. I don't necessarily think highly of his wrestling. If Hermanson takes him down, Dolidze is one of those fighters who's he seems fairly likely to just kind of stay on his back and look for subs from there. But I think Hermanson is a good enough positional grappler, good enough with his submission defense that I think he'll be able to keep himself safe. So anyway, I'm repeating myself enough about that. I like Jack Hermanson here, probably by decision, but I'm not interested in betting it. All right, next up we've got Tai Tuivasa versus Sergey Pavlovich in the heavyweight division. This is a pretty cool matchup. I'm a big fan of heavyweights. You guys know that about me. But Tai Tuivasa at 15-4, Sergey Pavlovich at 16-1. We see it shows Tuivasa at plus 135. That is definitely not accurate. Let's see if we check fightodds.io here. We see Pavlovich can be had for minus 188, but he's more like minus 200, minus 220. Tuivasa can be had for as high as plus 185, which is where I bet him at. There, I just tipped my hand. I did bet Tai Tuivasa here. I put 1 unit on him at plus 185. These guys are about the same age. Pavlovich 6'3" to Tuivasa's 6'2". The reach is what really stands out here. Sergey Pavlovich, unless you count John Jones as still being on the UFC roster, I know he's allegedly fighting in 2023. I think John Jones's reach is 84 and a half. If you don't count John Jones, then Sergey Pavlovich has the longest reach on the UFC roster. Sorry, I'm technically working right now. My boss just sent me a message, but we're almost done here. So yeah, obviously they say typically A person's wingspan is more or less the same as their height, while Sergey Pavlovich is 6 feet 3 inches tall and his wingspan is 7 feet. So yeah, guy's got very long arms, very very long reach. Even compared to his height. Uh, Pavlich, I'm looking at my notes here, trying to see what else I wanted to. These guys have 23 first round finishes between them. So, it's no secret what we're going to be looking for here and what the game is here. Pavlovich is a guy who the way he fights though is he's not necessarily super aggressive until he hurts you. He's not necessarily high volume. He kind of hangs back and waits for his moment. But he's so powerful that usually when he lands his first big punch early in the fight, it's going to stumble his opponent. It's going to hurt his opponent. And when that happens, he's very good at just hitting that switch and coming forward, throwing big hooks, just unloading and going for it. And more often than not, he's able to get the finish when he does that. Um, Tai Tuivasa, he still has a little bit of a reputation as a bit of a brawler. I don't think he deserves that reputation anymore. I mean, I think he's leaving that reputation behind a little bit now. Like if you watch the Cyril Gahn fight, I think Tuivasa put on a surprisingly mature and patient and intelligent striking performance there against one of the. I mean, I've gone on record saying I think when everything is said and done, I think Cyril Gahn. I think there's a decent chance Cyril Gahn is going to be the best heavyweight in UFC. Excuse me, the best heavyweight in UFC history. Um, Tai Tuivasa went in there and put on an impressive striking performance against, arguably one of the best strikers that we've ever seen in the UFC, one of the best fighters, period, we've ever seen in the UFC's heavyweight division. I mean, Tai even knocked him down once. He hurt him with punches a couple times. I mean, I think he put on a very impressive striking performance there. Um, to me, it's hard to get much of a read on how good Sergey Pavlovich actually is. He does have some fights in his pre UFC career where he went longer. He even went 5 rounds, I think, once. And I did watch some of that footage, but it's just to me, it's different when it's a while ago because somebody's always improving. It's also different when you're watching them fight against a lower level of competition. But part of me, like I can see why Pavlovich is a minus 200 favorite here. He's a really impressive guy who's been able to do really impressive things against everyone he's been in there against. But after to me, this line made more sense before Tuivasa's fight with Cyril Gahn. After seeing Tuivasa's fight with Cyril Gahn, I think that the plus 185 that's hanging out on him right now, I think that's a really good line. Could Pavlovich find that finish on Tuivasa early? Obviously, we know Tuivasa has a chin. He can be knocked out, he can be hurt, but it's pretty tough to do. If Pavlovich does Pavlovich things in round one, but isn't able to get Tuivasa out of there, what is he going to look like in round two? You know, I think Tai Tuivasa is capable of surviving the storm and putting together another mature, intelligent, patient striking performance here and finding his moment and getting Sergey Pavlovich out of there, potentially in round two. It might not even be a bad idea if you're interested in betting Tai Tuivasa to look to bet him live because Pavlovich is probably going to do Pavlovich things in round one. You might get an even better line on Tai Tuivasa in round two. All things considered, I don't I don't think like I wouldn't trust somebody who says that they're really confident in who's going to win this fight. I don't think you can be. But I did bet Tuivasa at plus 185 simply because I think that line is off. I think fight to me it's almost a coin flip, and so I had to take that line on Tai Tuivasa. As for a pick, you know what? I'm going to pick Tai Tuivasa. You got to there's always a couple underdogs that win on every card, right? And I think Tuivasa is a very live dog here. I'm going to pick Tai Tuivasa to win by KO in round two. All right, 48 minutes in. We got to hurry it up. Perfect, because this is a fight that I have almost nothing to say on. um, I suck at capping flyweight fights. Mateus Nicolau versus Matt Schnell. Nicolau 18-2, Schnell 16-7. Nicolau is a pretty big favorite at minus 225. Come back on Schnell plus 190. These guys are about the same age. Schnell's got 2 inches of height and 4 inches of reach here. Yeah, I'm really not going to say much about this fight. Nicolau is 6-1 in the UFC, 8-2 if you count tough. He's a BJJ black belt. He's got some interesting submissions in his arsenal, but since he's gotten to the higher level, to the UFC level, most of his wins are by decision. Matt Schnell is 6-5 at the UFC level. He's had pretty like mixed results, but one thing that we can say about this guy, especially if you watch the Sumaderj fight, is he's an absolute dog. He's a dog on a bone. It's hard to get him out of there, and if you don't get him out of there, he's going to come at you and come at you and come at you, and he's not out of it until he's out of it, right? Um, like I said, Mateus Nicolau is a big favorite. Or wait, minus 225. Actually, he's a bigger favorite than that now. Let's check. Oh yeah, he shows minus 340, even up as high as minus 400, minus 500 range in spots with Matt Schnell at plus 315. This is the spot. Yeah, I'm going to pick Nicolau to win. I would not touch him at that kind of line. If I was going to bet this, I would be betting Matt Schnell. I also think this is a fight that is pretty likely to end inside the distance or under 2.5. So those are bets that you might want to look at as well. I'm not going to say much else about this fight because I suck at capping flyweight fights and I just didn't have a strong read on this fight and I just didn't have much interest in it. So we're going to move on, but I will pick Mateus Nicolau. Well, let's pick him to win by KO. Next up, what is this? The co-main event already? I think so. Rafael dos Anjos versus Brian Barberena at is this fight at lightweight or welterweight? I'm not even sure. Well, it's at welterweight. It's got to be at welterweight, right? Yeah. If I'm wrong, let me know in the comments. I'm pretty sure it's at welterweight. I just had to think about it for a second. Rafael dos Anjos 31-14. Brian Barberena is 18-8. We see dos Anjos minus 340 here on Tapology. That is not correct. I'm going to check fightodds.io. Rafael dos Anjos more like minus 500, minus 600, even minus 700 in spots now. Brian Barberena, best you can get him is plus 425. I don't think there's much need to provide a massive breakdown on this fight. Rafael dos Anjos is a legend. He's 38 years old now, so he's getting up there in years a little bit, but he's still he certainly appears to still have it, right? I was there live for his fight with Renato Moicano, and all the credit to Moicano. Moicano looked great in that fight. He kept coming. He pretty much could have had the fight stopped like 5 different times, and he kept doing his thing. But dos Anjos just showed what a skilled fighter he is, what a consummate professional he is in there. The guy's got it all. He's incredibly well rounded. He's incredibly dangerous. He's really really good. He's a future Hall of Famer, former champion. All that about Rafael dos Anjos. Brian Barberena is one of those guys he's largely just tough, you know? And I hate to oversimplify like that, where it sounds like I'm like taking away from a guy's skill set, but that's kind of Brian Barberena's thing. I actually saw Brian Barberena fight. I can't even remember who he fought. I saw him fight at a show in Fargo, North Dakota years ago. I think Brian Barberena is, unless I'm mixing him up with somebody, I think he's from Minneapolis, or he's from. I grew up in Minnesota. He's from that area, I think, and I saw him fight in Fargo. But anyway, that is not the point. Um, you know, unless I'm just going to say this, unless something crazy happens, Rafael dos Anjos should win this fight and pretty handily, as evidenced by the minus 500, minus 600 line. You know, Brian Barberena, I mean, does he have a puncher's chance? That's the only thing I can see really here is a puncher's chance. But dos Anjos is just so skilled in every area that I really can't see Brian Barberena just lobbing out a big punch and having to catch him and finish the fight. That's really the only way I can see him winning, and that is exactly as unlikely as the minus 500, minus 600 price tag implies. So that's all I'm going to say about that. Rafael dos Anjos, I think he'll probably find a finish here. Either a submission or maybe a ground and pound kind of situation. But I don't like the line that he's at now. I did throw him in a parlay when he was at like minus 400 or so, I think. But yeah, anyway, that's all I'm going to say about that. We'll say dos Anjos by, we'll say submission. And finally, we're just shy of an hour. We've got the main event of the evening. Stephen Thompson versus Kevin Holland. Wonder Man. We'll call him Wonder Man versus Big Mouth. I love that Wonder Boy. He's still called Wonder Boy. He's almost 40. Kevin Holland is 30. Stephen Thompson 16-6-1, Kevin Holland 23-8. I love that the narrative of this fight is that it's the veteran versus the newcomer, the up and comer. Like Kevin Holland has more fights than Stephen Thompson is. Obviously, Stephen Thompson is a lifelong martial artist. Like I'm not taking anything away from that, but I just think it's funny when just because Thompson's been in the UFC longer. I heard the stats. I can't remember now. Thompson's been in the UFC, forever. and only has like a few more UFC fights than Holland, because obviously Holland, fought 5 times in 2020 or whatever. And he's just a guy who's been really busy getting in there a lot. And Stephen Thompson doesn't necessarily stay that busy, but Kevin Holland is 6'3" to Stephen Thompson's 6 feet. Holland has 81 inches of reach to Thompson's 75 inches of reach. I'll go ahead and show my hand right away. I did bet Kevin Holland here. I wasn't sure if I was going to at first, but I ended up feeling like there were enough things on Kevin, enough advantages on Kevin Holland's side that I was comfortable betting him. I think I got him at minus 125 or something. Uh, Kevin Holland, obviously, he has the size and reach advantage here. He's the more well-rounded fighter, and he's about 10 years younger. Stephen Thompson is still dangerous. Fantastic striker, fantastic karateka. I grew up studying karate myself, so I do enjoy the karate-based fighters quite a bit. I like Stephen Thompson. I think he's a good guy. I think he's a good fighter. I like watching him fight, and he is definitely, um, you know, he's definitely live here. He's not going to get smoked or anything. But being 39 years old and having the kind of style that he has, he's such a his like sort of point karate type of style is a style that really relies on quickness and reaction time. And quickness and reaction time are the first things to start to fade when you get up to be like 40 years old, right? He's still looked good in his recent fights. I don't think he's totally washed or anything, but Kevin Holland is, a pretty athletic guy, pretty fast twitch kind of guy. Um, he throws his long whipping strikes. He's really good at that, and I just think it's going to be tough for Stephen Thompson to be able to keep up with what Kevin Holland is capable of doing at Stephen Thompson's advanced age. If this fight were taking place and they were both 30 years old, it would be different. But I do think Stephen Thompson is the more technical striker of the two, but Kevin Holland does have that reach and does have that ability to just whip those long strikes the way that he does. Holland also he's not a great wrestler, but he does have grappling in his back pocket. He can look to if he fights at range, if he has like a distant striking match, he's giving Stephen Thompson the fight that he wants. I think Holland can win that fight, but I think it would be smarter for Holland to look to clinch here, look to strike in close, look to wrestle and grapple. I don't know that he will. I think that's Kevin Holland's smartest path to victory here is to look to clinch and wrestle and grapple. I don't know that he'll do that because it isn't typically what he does, but I think he can hold his own distance striking with Thompson for as long as he needs to, and I think he can look to clinch and potentially grapple if he decides to go that route. But all things considered, I decided that I liked what Kevin Holland has to offer here enough to go ahead and bet him. And with 5 rounds to work with, I think Holland probably finds a finish here. I'm going to say Kevin Holland by finish in, I don't know, let's go round 4. Um, you know what I'm going to do that I never do? I'm going to run through my picks quick. Hopefully I can remember who I actually picked. First fight of the night, I'm going to pick Yasmin, but I did bet Estela Nunes. Second fight, I'm going to pick Francis Marshall. No bet there. Next fight, I'm going to pick Natan Levy. I believe I bet that one to end under 2.5. Tracy Cortez versus Amanda Hebosh. I'm going to pick Tracy Cortez. I did bet her as well. Darren Elkins versus Jonathan Pierce. I'm going to pick Jonathan Pierce, but if I were going to bet it, I would take that big plus money on Elkins. Michael Johnson versus Mark Diakase. I'm going to pick Diakase there. Clay Guida versus Scott Holtzman. I'm going to pick Scott Holtzman, but definitely not a confident pick. Angela Hill versus Emily Ducote. I'm going to pick Angela Hill. Nico Price versus Philip Rowe. I like Phil Rowe there. Eric Anders versus Kyle Daukaus. Oh, man, I don't remember who I picked in this one. I really don't. Oh, yeah, I did. I picked Kyle Daukaus by submission. Let's go with that. Next up, Jack Hermanson versus Roman Dolidze. I'm going to pick Jack Hermanson by decision. Tai Tuivasa versus Sergey Pavlovich. I like Tai Tuivasa to win by KO in round 2. Mateus Nicolau versus Matt Schnell. I'm going to pick Mateus Nicolau, let's say by KO. I don't know. I don't know much about that fight. Rafael Dos Anjos versus Brian Barberena. I like Dos Anjos to find a finish there, potentially a sub. And Stephen Thompson versus Kevin Holland. I like Kevin Holland. Let's say he gets a finish in round 4. Okay, let's take a look at what I've got for bets for this card, and then I gotta get out of here to go play trivia with my wife. All right, so the bets I've got so far, I put 1.25 units on Kevin Holland at minus 125 to win 1 unit. I've got a unit on Tai Tuivasa at plus 185, a unit on Phil Rowe at plus 121, a unit on Tracy Cortez at plus 110, and a unit that I will probably never see again on Estella Nunez at plus 300. That's a value spot. She probably won't win, but plus 300, man, I don't know. That just seems silly to me. I did parlay Rafael dos Anjos and Mark Diakese. I put 2 units on that at minus 138. I bet Natan Levy and Hernaro Valdez to go under 2.5 rounds, 1.4 units to win one at minus 140. And then I also parlayed Guido Holtzman to go over 2.5 and Hill Ducote to go over 2.5. I got that minus 113, 1.13 units. All right, that's all I got for you folks. As always, thank you so much for watching. I am Erik with Erik Bets Fights. You can find me on Twitter at Erik Bets Fights, on Instagram at Erik_Bets_Fights. Also, if you check the description under this video here, you can find various other places to find me, including the make sure you subscribe to the Never Hedge Media email newsletter. It's free. I send out my written breakdowns of the fights every week. Kyle from Never Hedge also sends out written breakdowns. He sends out his bets. Basically, you get a bunch of cool written MMA betting information, and it's completely free. So you can sign up for that. The link is down there as well. Also, just a reminder about that Bet US situation. The link for that is down below here. If you go in there and make a deposit, they're going to match your deposit at 125%, and they're going to give a little of that dough to your boy. Apparently, I don't even know how much, but again, thank you so much for stopping by. I am Erik from Erik Bets Fights, reminding you to play it smart, play it tight. Let's grow those bankrolls. Enjoy the fights at UFC Orlando this weekend, everybody. Take care.